Welcome to Jacked Theology. Glad that you have joined us today. We're back better than ever after a little summer break. We
Yeah,
had
I
one little
had a little summer siesta, right?
we had one of these during the summer, but yeah, coming back. Hopefully we'll stay more consistent. But
I missed you, man. I missed you, but
I,
it was also nice to have a little bit of time off. I have to admit.
yeah, our August we spent about 3 weeks off, so it was good and refreshing, and it's good to be back. Feel good energy, although you might hear me. I have a little nasal thing going on, and
You
it's
got
it's
you got
weird because
you
it's
got
like,
the COVID. You got the COVID.
yeah, well, you can't get COVID if you don't test for it. So, uh,
That's the rule, right? That's the rule.
yeah. So yeah, and it's like the hottest week of the year so far this week, which is really annoying. But um, yeah, good to be back. I saw your following continues to grow on the X now, even
Yeah,
despite
even though everybody has
Elon
left,
Musk.
yeah, it continues to go up. I think though, it's growth by hate and anger rather rather than people who are
I
truly
was just gonna
following.
say, I think a lot of these people just hate you and want to see what you're gonna post next.
There are a lot of people in the world who just I think who just like to be angry, and it seems as though sadly the Christian world is no different.
Yeah, I got on there the other day and I just got angry. I think that was Elon's goal. I miss pre-Elon Twitter days. It was a lot more fun. Um, but one thing that blew up on the socials, the Twitter, the made its way over to Facebook too, and some of my pastoral group text we want to talk about today, and kind of the broader topic of pastoring in America. Where Kevin and I are two pastors. Our primary calling and mission is to be pastors. And so something I think we could both talk about from experience with a healthy amount of authority. And so Alexander Lane wrote an article on why he left the church called Departure, Why I Left the Church. And he resigned this well, 2 Sundays ago. The article came out this week from First Presbyterian Church of Arlington Heights, after being there for a while. And he talks about why he did that, which, as I read the article, we'll dive into it some. I resonated a lot with that. I mean, the stuff he talked about was stuff pastors experience a lot. And anecdotally, I see a lot of pastors arguing about it, whether they agree with it or not, to disagree with it, which is fascinating. And I tend to see pastors that disagree with it are those that maybe pastored churches that didn't really get into the grime of pastoring, of ministry, and more they stayed they removed themselves from actual pastoring and just became more of a figurehead, if you will, or they were pastoring like a church plant amongst their friends. Because I will say I have church planted, and I have now a pastored established churches as well. And I would say there are different dynamics in those. And I think what Alexander was talking about here, you definitely experience more in a more traditional pastoring setting than like a church plant or bivocational setting, where quite honestly, the stresses of a church plant are way different. You just don't have money or people, and
Yeah, I knew
and
everything
so,
about church ministry until I planted something.
yeah, and then you can't get money or people, and so those are your stresses. But the people that are there typically are your friends and pals, and so you tend not to deal with some of the things Alexander brought up. So that's kind of what I see actually among the debates. I feel like those that disagree with what he had to say um, maybe hadn't experienced fully what he was talking about.
Yeah.
I know I
Did
had.
you?
I know.
I
Go ahead.
wonder though, is that intentional though? I sometimes wonder when I hear pastors pushing back against things like this. First of all, I feel this like utter lack of compassion. I mean, I don't know that you actually have to have empathy in order to sympathize with people. Like, you're a pastor, like, you get it. No matter what context you're serving in, it's hard, it's tough. And if You say it's not, you're either lying to your congregation or you're lying to yourself. The easiest pastor roles are some of the most difficult jobs, I think, in the world. And so, to come at a guy, to come at somebody who's having the experience that Alexander has had, and to have zero lack of empathy is one thing, but to have zero sympathy is another. And I wonder, do you think it's because there's just so much jealousy and tension between pastors over just differences? I think I wonder if it's because they just really don't understand, or if it's because they won't let themselves understand because they're happy whenever somebody who is in a different theological stream or thinks or does ministry differently than them fails. For church planners, it's it feels kind of good to see a big guy fail. For somebody who's pastoring a big church, it's kind of fun to see the church plant in town fail. There's a lot of jealousy, I think, and sadly, a lot of just sin that comes in to pastors. So I just wondered if you thought, as you were
Yeah.
kind of reading other people's response to this, if you felt any of that in there, that they were just kind of being dishonest about, if it went
I think
beyond
there's,
compassion to
yeah,
being dishonest.
I think there's jealousy. I think, yeah, whatever ministries you're setting in, you are currently in, you think is harder than everyone else's. And I think we just
Right?
need to come, we, we just need to come to
Is that not
realization
true?
that,
It's true for me, Matt.
yeah,
Mine is
well,
harder
yeah.
than anybody else. What I don't know
So,
about you.
yeah, when you hear somebody outside the way you're doing ministry talk about stuff like this, you're naturally going to be like, oh, toughen up. You don't know what it's like. Um, and I think we just need to understand that ministry
Suck
is
it up,
hard.
Buttercup.
Yeah. Across the board. When you're in any organization, I think Peter Drucker talked about the hardest jobs in America are the people, and he listed them, and they're the people that deal with people, that lead people as a career path. And he talked about, presidents of social organizations like colleges, those sorts of things, and hospitals, and then also teachers, and then he said pastors. He listed three kind of buckets, and it's true. You look at that, and even Alexander, in his article here, talked about how he had a politician in his church that would not serve on the church board because it was more toxic than
Than
pol-
politics.
politics.
I, you
Which
know,
it's true. So
it's true.
actually,
It's true.
for
When
me
you're
as a young
running
pastor,
when you're running to politics to get away from from what goes on in the church boardroom, you know that the way we do American church is broken somewhere.
well, I learned more about pastoring a church in America from political books, honestly. Like, I read a book on the leadership of Abraham Lincoln, and as I was reading that, I learned so much on how to deal with church boards and church leadership through that. So there's a lot of politics, a lot of toxic stuff that happens. And then there's another argument that I heard. It's like, um, kind of a suck it up buttercup, but like, yeah, ministry's hard, but deal with it and don't talk about how ministry's hard because we're giving the church a bad name, which, um,
Yeah, that's the
I'm not.
thing. I mean, that's a theology,
Yeah,
right? I mean,
yeah,
don't talk bad about the bride of Christ.
yeah,
Don't treat her that way. What's Jesus going to think if you say something about his woman? And I'm like, okay,
yeah.
first of all, there's so much latent misogyny, and masculinity wrapped up in that idea of don't say something bad about the church because
But that just feeds into why pastors are quitting. Like, so saying that then isolates pastors from talking about it, speaking up, and he quoted a Barna study here. He said 42% of pastors from Barna considered quitting over the last year, and the top reasons are the stress of the job and then feeling lonely and isolated. Um, and then it's political divisions, the effect it has on our family, and then you're not optimistic about the future of the church. So yeah, like by saying "stuck it up, Buttercup," don't talk about it. You're basically just feeding into why they're struggling to begin with. And so I think the one thing I think is great from this article is it has created dialogue amongst pastors, and I think we should lean into it. We should hear from pastors. We should allow pastors to be honest. And, if you're in a congregation and you have a pastor and you're listening, create an environment where your pastor can be safe and express some of these things, and so that they don't feel lonely, or find them a place they can go and invest in a place where they could um, share the things that are stressing them out. But he listed, maybe we could go through. Um, he listed a bunch of things here. So he talked about the unrealistic expectations. I had to laugh at this because he says basically, you have to go get the different degrees if you want to be a pastor in different churches, which is true. I mean, if you look at any resume to be a pastor, you've got to have certain level of experience and certain degrees, which costs a lot of money, and then you get a meager salary, and then we're expected to pay off those debts to get to those degrees. We're expected, to be involved in all sorts of things in the community and not really make any money to pay for any of that, which creates a stress on the family. But then he talks about all the roles that we're supposed to have in the church. So he says, making a meager salary, he lists about $55,000 a year, which is about what the average pastor in America makes.
Yeah, it looks like
Which,
he
if
was
you're
in a
watching the,
fairly significant sized church. I mean,
yeah,
I was a little amazed at that number, but it's
but then,
reality.
yeah, um, they cap you at a certain point. Churches say, well, that this is the end. This is as far as you're going. Um, and most of the people in the congregation wouldn't accept that as a salary for anything really, but especially what all that we have to do. So he lists them all. We're a professional speaker. We're the CEO. We're the counselor. We're the fundraiser. We're the HR director. We're the master of ceremonies, and then we have to be a pillar of virtue for everyone. And I'll add something: we can have no opinion other than the opinion of each person in our congregation.
Which would be
Um,
okay if each person in the congregation had the same opinion.
yeah. um, I was actually thinking before I read this article a couple few weeks over the last even months. I've been thinking about this too because I've been talking a lot with folks in our community just about the different dynamics and things that I've had to do as a pastor. And one of the things I found is I've talked to multiple high level managers at companies you would know if I listed them that we use every day and interact with every day who have never fired or hired anyone in their careers, and they make, I want to say, 10 times what I make, right? Maybe more. And yet I've done that so many times, right? Like we've probably both hired and fired many people, like as the human resource
It is
director.
one of the worst experiences in the world to have to let somebody go in a church context because it's not just about employment. It's about it affects faith. It affects community. It's miserable. It almost makes me wish nobody was an employee of the
Yeah.
church at all. Um,
It's one of the worst experiences I've had, but a friend of mine was asking me advice for how to go through it because it was the first time they've had to do it. And I was struck, like, I've been doing this for 20 years, right? Um, and I'm giving this guy advice, probably that if I was a consultant for his company, I would get paid a lot of money for. And yet here we are as pastors making nothing, right? And then the congregation expects us to do all of these things. Um, you know, we're fun, the fundraising aspect. I think every minister has to deal with that dynamic, except, with the exception maybe of some of our mega churches out there. Um, the counselor, CEO, like how do you, so counselor, CEO, HR director, like as a pastor, most of the people that I've led on staff have also been members of our church and come to me as their pastor, right? And so they're dealing with issues. And so how do I maintain being an executive in their life as their boss, but then also dealing with the baggage that a pastor wants to deal with and counsel them. A lot of times those dynamics conflict, right? Sometimes what you
Yeah,
counsel somebody for will lead to their firing, right? And and I haven't always handled that well. Like, and those are tough situations that lead you to depression, that lead you to angst, anger, um, your mental instability. I mean, he quotes Dan White, a pastor who was in the New York Times, talking about this issue, how he went away and he was shaking, like he uncontrollably, because of all the stress and anxiety from all of this, all these broken relationships. And it's so true. So you make a decision as a CEO, as an executive for the church, um, then your congregants get mad because you made that decision, and they take it out on you. They might leave the church, and so it's really like lose lose situations. And so you can see, I've experienced it where the stress just becomes overwhelming. Your mental health suffers. Um, and so to say that, to suck it up, buttercup, I think is unfair. It's unloving. Um, it's, and to call someone out for making the decision to leave the pastorate. And when you read this article, it doesn't sound like he's definitely not leaving the faith. And I don't
yeah.
think he's leaving the identity as pastor.
It didn't sound that
I
way, did it?
Yeah, I think he's leaving the physical church because of, he just wants to help, like, pastor people. He just wants to pastor them. And it sounds like he's going to do that through his coaching and writing and different things like that. So,
Yeah, I
um,
mean, he started with that. The Great Resignation. Pastors are leaving the church. Most pastors aren't leaving the faith, and they don't want to leave the church, but they feel like the church has left them. And looking at this list here, Matt, it's it's insane, the expectations, and we expect pastors to be good, to be proficient at each and every one of those things. And we'll say no, we don't, but whenever money needs to be raised, we do. Whenever our person whom we have pleaded and begged to come to church comes that one Sunday, you expect your pastor to be on his game that week, no matter how much fundraising or counseling or leading or business meetings he had to do that week. And it's an impossible job. And there are constituencies in every single church, in every single one of these categories, that think that you're a failure. No matter how good you speak, there is a contingent of people who think you're not a good speaker and will tell you and talk to others. No matter how well you lead, there's a contingent of people in your church who think that you're not a good CEO and will tell others. No matter how great a counselor you are, there is a contingent of people in your church who believe you're not a good counselor. And so each of these people have folks in each of these categories, have people in your church who that's the only thing they care about, and you're never going to be good enough. And that adds up. You know, you get 100 people in your church, 300 people in your church, 7 people and their families are a lot of people. 2 or 3 people who talk to those people and agree with them are a lot of people. And you can begin to see why the turnover rate in churches is so high, in that it is nearly impossible to keep people happy anymore, no matter how well you're doing. The only way to do that truly is to be a politician, and to, in a lot of ways, be, and he talks about this in this difference between, what was it? How do you frame it? Growth mindset, or a growth minded individual, uh, or a
yeah,
growth
yeah,
mindset
growth
versus
versus
fixed
fixed.
mindset. You have to, as a pastor, essentially swallow what you feel like God has called you to do in the church, and just keep people happy.
Yeah. I mean, anytime I've gotten in trouble in the church, it's because I've wanted people to grow. And he talked about that in here, about if you challenge people to grow and become more like Jesus, they're gonna not like you for it. They're gonna push back against it. And then so you have that, and then you have all these other roles that, like you're talking about, where people are complaining about how you're inadequate in those areas.
Oh, sorry about that. Wrong button.
Sorry, little pause. Um, yeah, it's just, and so yeah, like, pastors either just quit, give up, collect their meager paycheck, say whatever. Um, and continue in the role, or they fight it, um, you know, or they do what Alexander did here and just move on to something different, and live out their calling in a different way. And I don't think you can get mad at somebody for that. And
No,
I don't
no, you can't.
understand that.
And I don't know. Did he talk about this in here, Matt? I can't remember because I've read so many of these articles. Did he talk about his family at all?
He talked not in detail, but he talked about that was one of the reasons why um, pastors are leaving the church. So I
Yeah,
can assume that it affected his family.
yeah. Well,
But
and I think that that's it. People say, well, you were never called to ministry then, or you don't have what it takes if you can't put up with this kind of stuff. Which, first of all, is shit. Sorry, but it just is. But second of all, so many of these pastors are leaving the church because it's too much for them and their ability to be thriving individuals or at least survive. But most of the time, and oftentimes, what I see is it's because of the family. It is the you know secondary effect on their families, on their kids, on their wives, on their marriages, on the people who they love and care about. And at the end of the day, pastors, they're making a decision between 10 complaining people in a church who aren't going to shut up and you know saving their kids from having to experience this day in and day out, or the grief that it causes the spouse. There, at some point or other, the return on investment from serving God in the church isn't great enough to make their family endure another day.
yeah, I mean, it affects your family. It it's one of the only careers paths, I believe, outside of maybe a local politician, that your family is in the fishbowl with you. Most of our congregants, most of America goes to their job, and no one knows who their family is, right? If they saw them walking on the street, they wouldn't know it. And so, yeah, your family is part of the deal. Your family takes bullets. Your family hears the criticisms. They hear the stuff behind the back. It affects them, especially the kids. The kids are aware. They're perceptive. They notice. And so, yeah, I would never fault a man or a woman for resigning and moving on from the church because of they want to take care of their family better. And you know, the church hasn't kept up. I mean, we don't like to talk about finance. The church is one of the things we don't talk about is finances, right? But like the world that we live in, inflation's gone up incredibly high, and pastor salaries have stayed the same. So we think we're going to keep adding all this stuff onto the pastor, and not pay him, and
Yeah,
then
funding is going
expecting,
down. People are giving less and less to charity because their
yeah,
margins are lower and lower. And tithing. We could have this whole conversation about tithing and whether or not it's biblical and whether or not it should go to the church or other things. But even at that, the difficulty is most churches just aren't in a place where it would be very difficult for them under the current circumstances to financially pay a pastor what is worth. And many pastors, I have to admit, who I talk to, would be more than willing to truly consider bivocational work. Would be truly willing, especially the younger pastors, have no issues with side hustles and secondary forms of income. In fact, many pastors would love for that to be the case because they have a concern that at some point their church lets them go. They don't see it coming or they have to leave and they have nowhere to go. They have to uproot their families. They have to move to somewhere else. They have to try to find a church. It can take 6 months to 2 to 3 years to find a new call. Most pastors fear losing the job as it is, and they would love to have things on the side to help them support themselves if a day ever comes where they have to walk away. But the difficulty churches, there's no part-time work in churches. Pastors know that, yeah, okay, the church can't pay me. I'll go part-time, but I'm still going to be working full-time. And so it's a catch-22
yeah,
situation for pastors financially, because again, we come down to expectations. The expectations that we place on pastors are not only unreasonable, I would say they're sinful and evil.
yeah. I mean, I resonate with all that. I think there's a fear because I think congregations know all that the pastors do, and so if a pastor is only say working 20 hours a week, and they were working somewhere else, a lot of stuff would fall through the cracks. It would drop to people in the church, or it just wouldn't happen. Which I'm a big believer. If stuff doesn't happen, that's okay, right? Like why have churches? This is a whole, like, I guess, theology thing on what the church actually is, but churches have become this. Eugene Peterson calls it religious warehouses, right? With their retail shops, and so we have all these programs and things we do to maintain, when not, it may not necessarily be the what the church should be in the community. A lot of churches do, or a lot of community organizations do stuff way better. Like, one of the things I've been thinking about is just youth groups. Like, in our town, at least, in the surrounding areas, all the youth groups have dwindled. Which in the '90s, youth groups were huge, right? And so it's kind of like stayed on. But like, my kids are involved in a lot of youth organizations in the community that do way better jobs, and they're just like a youth group. They create that positive community environment. They create that positive vibe for kids, teach them good moral discipline like a youth group would. Even do mission service projects. It's literally legit. A lot of these things are run like youth
Yeah,
groups.
no, most of
They're
these
just,
churches have grown mega churches by essentially just copying everything that a city would do for
yeah.
you
So
as a member
why?
of that community, and creating it insular. It's like white flight a little bit. Like,
Yeah,
people ran from urban areas into the suburbs to get away and to do their own thing. And white people, and it's not just a white thing, but evangelicals, those of us who are Christians, have run from the world, from culture around us, in order to create this bubble, to protect ourselves, to protect our kids, to have sports, to have community, to have groups, to have these experiences, to have age stuff, if you're a senior citizen, to have stuff for your kids, for your babies. And we've separated ourselves from the world. Homeschooling versus public education, Christian school versus we've created this intro thing to try to protect ourselves. And I just keep remembering in my head Jesus' high priestly prayer in John: in the world, not of the world, but not out of the world. I
yeah,
have called you to be salt and light in the world, not to distance yourself and show them how to live by creating all of the stuff that insulates you from them. Jesus came to bust out the insulation, but to change you, so that you would actually be interacting with people in community groups and at YMCA's, and on the sports fields with other kids whose parents are cussing at their kids. And yeah, you don't want your kid to see that, but that's the world, right? I mean,
yeah,
they're going to grow up and be in that world anyway. Show them how to do it before they get there.
yeah. I think you hit the nail on the head. I mean, we can't compete unless we have like the big mega thing. We can't compete with what the world's already doing. We can't beat Disney World, but we can enter into that stuff and be a presence there. And then that frees the pastor up. That frees up a lot of their time where they could go get another job. And if churches would take their hands off of that a bit and actually just be the church.
Yeah. And we got to stop
That's what.
expecting pastors of 100 and 200 member churches to have perfect sermons and Sunday mornings that wow you, and programs to meet every single need of the one or two people in the church who fit that demographic. Just
Yeah,
eh, we've got to rethink church from the ground up. And I just don't think we're at a place, and Alexander Lane's article kind of proves this. I just don't think that we're largely at a place where we want to do that. Instead, what we want to do is find a place that resonates with our politics, that agrees with us, where we can go and have safety, from CNN, or go and have safety from Fox News. And it's just we're
I mean,
killing the church, but we're killing our pastors.
outside of loneliness, that's what Barna found, was the next biggest cause for pastors to leave was politics.
Since 2016, we've been in that. Right? I mean, we've been in it for a long time, but I think
For a while.
2016, the lid kind of came off of the hate and the
I,
anger
I'll
and the
just say it.
frustration just boiled over.
Donald Trump threw a grenade in what was already brewing, and he divided the church, and the church has let him divide the church and continues to do that, unfortunately. And he talked about, I want to talk about this too, because this is something that doesn't happen, um, in church plants. So in a church plant, if someone disagrees with your theology, they disagree with your CEO ship, your HR abilities, your accounting abilities, all of those things. In a church plant, they just leave. You never see them again. Um, a lot of times, they don't even send you an email. They disappear off the face of the earth. In a more well-established church, which he talks about here, they try to lead a coup to get you out, right?
I've seen one or
Which,
two of those.
which we both experienced. Um, and so um, that dynamic is something that I don't think we fully, those that have never experienced it, fully understand how personal that becomes and how hurtful and how it affects your mental health and all of those things. Like, I don't know if you want to comment.
I don't even know where to begin to comment on that, Matt. I have never, I've never seen anything like it. You hear stories of it, you see it, but until you've seen it from the inside and behind the scenes, um, I mean, lawyers, parliamentarians, mental health people, crisis counselors, and still not able to figure it out. It's war. It's war. It's psychological warfare, and it's fueled by oftentimes, probably on both sides, but oftentimes it's fueled by this kind of self-righteous idea that we're right, in what we want and what we think, and at the end of the day, it's validated in some way or other tacitly, by the Bible or by Scripture. We use God and leverage God in order to prove that we're right and this other person is wrong, and we target that at pastors, and channel oftentimes our hate and frustration from other areas of our life into that, and don't even see it. But I don't even. The church is so modeled after the business world, and the church has allowed this stuff to happen. We promote people into positions of leadership on boards and even on staff and pastorates. I mean, about said a word here, a four-letter word, but we our most important position in the church is called executive pastor or lead minister. I mean, even the language that we use betrays what we truly see the church as. An executive pastor, a lead minister, has replaced kind of this senior minister role. The fact that we call it a board, even if you use the word elder and see them as that, we call it an elder board. We have brought this idea of business mindset and leadership into the church, and then we're shocked whenever the church acts like greedy American businesses, acts like a capitalistic structure where the person with the most money or the most influence wins. I think Jesus and the apostles would look at what we do in church from top to bottom and just be like, what is this thing? What the hell have you all done with this? Yeah, so I feel like I kind of rambled off from where you
No,
started. So rope me back in here.
I think yeah, what people do is they bring what they already know into the church. So yeah, in a business world, this is what they would do. They would lead a coup to get the leader out, through a variety of ways.
And we've not discipled people. I mean, I cut you off. Sorry, but we've not discipled people well. I mean, you're right that
Yeah,
people bring what they know into the church, and what we have done in the church, in all of our lifetimes who are alive today, is we have turned the church into a knowledge center rather than a heart or compassion center in general, where we feel like discipling people is teaching them more, is getting them more in the Bible, is getting them more into conversations, in groups with people, educating them more about doctrine. And none of those things are bad, but that's not discipling people. Whenever you look at scripture, you don't see any of that. Discipling people is getting them to sit at tables with other people in their community and have conversations. Discipling people is getting them to be serving, Micah 6:8, to love justice, to love mercy, to be involved in actively changing the fabric of the lives of the people in the communities in which they live. This process of actually living out your faith is discipling people. And so
Yeah.
what we bring into the church is hearts that are unchanged, but minds that think that they know it all. And we are surprised whenever those people who think they know it all about scripture, because we've taught them that that's what following Jesus is knowing things, believing things, rather than beloving things. We're shocked whenever people who think they know it all, or that the goal is to know it all, thinks they know it all.
Yeah. Well, and they use business principles. When I went through it a couple times,
Best practices.
yeah, stuff that's thrown in front of me is finances and butts and seats. The come on, the how much are you selling and how much are you bringing in and those sorts of things. Trying to leverage that against me to remove me when that's not what the church is about, and a lot of times they're wrong. I think too people do this. Well, they do it because you've said something or you're doing something that disagrees with something that's foundational in their life.
Yeah, it
Uh,
hits
you,
it hits right here. And at the
you've
end of the day,
stirred up
people don't like to
something.
be hit.
Yeah,
They don't like to feel vulnerable. The gospel hits a place in us, and we have a, like you say, we have a decision as to how we react. And a lot of times what we do is we react by fight.
yeah, and I've noticed that when people are doing this, they try to distance themselves from you as the person and create you as an inanimate object. Um, and so
Yeah,
when I
take
went
away
through
your
this,
humanity. Yeah.
yeah, I wasn't Pastor Matt. I was just the pastor, um, which I found fascinating. Like, and I one time, probably in my flesh, I I would correct them. I'm Pastor Matt, you know, make them say my name. But I think, yeah, there's an element to that they don't treat you as human. They know what they're doing is a hurtful. Like they know that they couldn't possibly go through what they're putting us through. And then the flip side. So then let's say the pastor quits over that, and then we blast him for it. Like what? Like really? Like, um, no one goes through this. In fact, if you put it back on person, if you were going through this in your company, um, I think you would be going to look for a new job, wouldn't you? Would you not? Like,
Yeah. No, I think it.
right?
I think people's reactions in those moments, whether it's compassion and love, or further condemnation, shows whether you're a Christian or not, or whether you're a pastor or not. And I,
Mhm.
and by that I don't mean whether or not your name is written in the Lamb's Book of Life. I mean whether or not you're following the teachings of Christ. If you see somebody go through what pastors go through, and especially what somebody like Alexander has gone through, and your reaction is to pile on rather than do anything other than to sit and grieve with them, you don't know my Jesus. You may say his name, but you just don't know Jesus. There's no other way. There's no other way around it. And I look at the people who are responding in these ways. Whenever Alex just pours his heart out about what goes on behind the scenes and what he went through. Um, and if your
And
reaction is,
he's just pulling the curtain back a little bit too.
yeah,
Like,
right.
for those who are saying like he wasn't wise to share all this detail about his experience as pastor, like there's way more. Like even you and I right now we're holding back. Like
Yeah, I can't write it. I can't say names. I can't tell
because it's
stories.
so evil how you're treated, and I don't think people understand until they're in that position. Um, how evil it is, how wrong it is. You know, there's been moments, and I know you've probably had this too, where I'm legit fearing for my physical body. Like I'm fearing that someone is going to hurt wants, and I know people want to hurt me
I
physically.
wore a bulletproof vest underneath my robe for like 6 months to a year in my church. I knew exactly where I needed to dive. I knew that the pulpit was made out of stone that was this thick, and that the baptismal was made out of stone. I knew where I needed to dive if somebody were to do something. Um, it was not unbased fear either. I had several individuals in the church encouraging me and helping, outsiders who are saying the level of hatred and venom and how unhinged multiple people in the church are. Um, this is wise. So, yeah, I mean, we're not talking figuratively. People harming you, very literal. um,
I had
danger.
I had a I had people come to me, friends, allies, hear through the grapevine that people were threatening me physically, behind my back. I never heard those directly, but yeah, it's a very real thing. And the venom, that they showed, and then people. My kid got bullied at school because of issues related to this, because parents were bashing me to their children, and so then the kids started treating my child poorly. So it's real, and I think I don't think people quite understand, and um, I completely when I read this, I somebody shared this on their Facebook wall after he wrote it. Before I saw, like, he was just sharing it as a positive. Hey, check this out. He was a former pastor and now does a lot of consulting for churches, and he's like, this was my experience in pastorate. And so I read it then, um, and my heart broke for him. I felt grief. I felt like, wow, I've gone through that too. I think, for me, I just kept thanking God that I have guys like you in my life, and others that, like, keep me on the path. But that doesn't mean necessarily that I won't one day have to make that same decision and step out and do something else. But I don't think that would ever change my calling and what I'm called to do. And I don't think Alexander's calling is changed at all. I think the venue in which he's living that out looks differently. So I think that's important. Like, he's not quitting Christ. He's not quitting his call. He's just quitting the church. Yeah. And he's living out somewhere else. Now you could argue if that's a wise decision, but for me, I don't want to argue that necessarily. I just want to grieve with him, and I want a dialogue around these real problems and these real expectations, these real pressures we put on the pastors, and that we're real people. We feel it. I know for me, the last few years have been difficult, from COVID, Trump, all the things related to that, all the things he talked about resonated with me. And it's like my mental health has suffered, and I've been going through a process of trying to get healthy mentally. Um, and so I think, like, we can't ignore it. And I know there's pastors out there that are hiding, that see people online. They saw this article maybe like me, and they read it and they're like, oh yeah, that's me. I'm glad people are opening the door to talk about it. And then you start seeing people bash him for writing this article. To me, that everyone who especially the pastors, in fact, most of the people I saw bashing this article are pastors that were bashing this. um,
It's,
Shame on you. I'll be blunt. Shame on you.
yeah,
You
yeah.
you should not have done that. I think that's
Well,
wrong
yeah.
and
You don't.
unhelpful.
The people the people who are bashing it are the people who are good at playing the pastor game in its current form. Those are not the pastors that the church needs. The folks who are good at the game. The hard part for me when I see these things, what makes me grieve is that the church is losing her best pastors, her best men, her best women, the folks who are throwing up their hands in the air and saying, I have had enough of this toxic environment, are the ones who are the most capable and needful in the true church of Jesus Christ. And so this great resignation that we are experiencing is leaving a cesspool that is getting more and more toxic within the church as the people both on the pastoral side and a lot of folks who are listening understand this from even a congregant side. You don't have to be a pastor to see the cesspool. You don't have to be a pastor to understand, even if you don't see everything behind the veil. You see enough to know, because you've considered walking away, or you've walked away from churches in the past, or maybe have just walked away completely now. So we don't need these pastors and these people leaving the church. These are the people who the church needs the most. And I speak obviously of the church there being a organization, more than I do, a people. The truth of the matter is that the church universal, the Church of Christ, is walking away from the church building. And so increasingly what is left in the church building is not anymore the church.
Yeah, I think I agree completely, and we're in a shift for sure on how the church is played out. Like even how he ends this article talking about what he's called to in the future. To me, sounds like pastoring, just in a different venue. And I think so. I think we have to rethink how we do church. I think that's the shift that's happening for a lot of people. Is like for so long, for decades, most white Americans went to church and they got their what was said on Sunday matched and lined up with what they heard on Fox News before they went to bed. We had all these separate Christian schools, Christian youth groups, separate from the world, and now all of that's coming to crumble, and we're realizing, well, that's not necessarily the church. That just was an American identity that we had, that utilized the church for those ends, and obviously some good Christian things still happen in the midst of that, but there's definitely a shifting happening, for a lot of reasons we've already talked about. Finances being a one. People interacting with a more traditional setting of church we've seen the last 20, 30 years, and pastors are trying to lead, because most of us pastors are visionaries. We love our church. We love to lead. We didn't get into this because we hate it, right? We got into this because we have a calling, we have a sense of passion, and we study, we think, we pray, we sense the Spirit's leading. We do a lot of research, and we see the church moving in a direction, and we want to move our church in that direction. And a lot of time, the resistance that comes, and so you say, all right, well, they don't want to do it, so let's move on to somewhere where we can do it and begin to see some traction. And so churches that are going to succeed into the future are churches that are willing to adjust and adapt and say, we're not doing that anymore, and this is how we're doing it. And we could do it. Maybe next time we do a whole podcast is some where we see the future of the church going. That might be a healthy dialogue. But I think the church, we have to shift. We have to shift. And the thing is I want to close this thought with this is we talked about business, how a lot of people think business minded. So if there was a great exodus, like we think about Blockbuster and Netflix is the classic thing. Like we look back on that, and Blockbuster didn't see the change coming, and Netflix did, right, to streaming. And look,
Kodak didn't see,
Blockbuster's
they
dead in
stayed
the
in.
water,
Yeah.
right? Yeah. And all these business leaders look at this. They talk about it all the time. We don't want to be Blockbuster. We want Netflix. Okay, so I'll put it back on you. Do you want to be Blockbuster, or do you want to be Netflix? Do you want to grow into the future, or do you want to just sit back and do the old thing that's dying, that's clearly dying, a slow, painful death? And
Everybody says they want to be
I think,
Netflix, but nobody wants to make the sacrifice.
yeah. Well, yeah, for the first, how many years Netflix was in debt, struggled, didn't, they had a vision, they had a plan, and they stuck with their guns, and look at them now. I mean, obviously books and studies galore about them. I'm sure there's many Harvard business classes about Netflix. So, yeah, put it back. I think the church has got to reevaluate, rethink how they do things, how they treat pastors. If you're a congregant, listening to this, maybe go have a conversation with your pastor and where he sees the future of the church going and how you can support him and seeing your church get there.
Yeah, no, I
So
think I was trying to think too. I
yeah,
was thinking, Matt, is there any way to salvage this? Um, and I will say I'm a bit of a pessimist on it, but I think, what advice would there be? I think what you said is absolutely right. There are some pastors out there that are crap that don't need to be pastors, or that have so lost, I think, have lost what it means to be called and to live out that call, that they just need to sit out for a season, of some length of time. But I will say, um, I don't think that that's I don't think that that's as common as we might think that it is when it comes to pastors, and for pastors who may be acting in ways that are not pastoral. In a lot of situations, I think it's just that they have done so reactionary that they've had to put on their armor and live in such a way to protect themselves as to be something that they're not. So where do we go from this? I think what you said, conversations is probably the only place that we can go, is for people who are listening or who care to begin to sit down with their pastors and with their families and just have meals and get to know each other. And probably best to start building relationships with your pastor or with your leaders, that aren't based on conversations about the church. In fact, intentionally decide, we're going to have 5 or 10 meals or hangouts with our families together where we're literally not going to talk. We're going to pretend as though we're not in the same church, and where we're not, maybe even Christians at all. Religion is told we're just going to simply be in proximity to each other, in some space other than religion, and get to know each other again as human beings. I think what you said was so true, that you make the out to be, not human anymore, and that's the place you have to get to in order to destroy them and hate them, and do the things that you do to them. And so I think the only antidote that there is to that movement, which happens in so many churches, is to find a way to humanize your pastor and his family or her family apart from church and apart from faith.
yeah, it's good. I would say if you're listening and this resonates with you and you want to talk, like reach out. I mean, to Kevin or I, we're more than happy to talk. We've been down the road a bit.
Yeah,
We
you and I
talked
both
about it
have
a month ago.
conversations behind the scenes.
Yeah.
Consulting, is
So
a formal word, but conversations all the time with folks who are struggling and just need a listening ear. Need somebody who's been there and who knows, and who may be able to advise, but more so just who understands. And yeah, you and I are both, I know,
yeah,
longing to be able to form those relationships and help folks who are in that situation.
it'll be great. So thanks for joining us on another episode of Jack Theology. We'll be
Yeah, it's
back
been a good
better
time. It's
than
good to be
ever
back
next
with you,
week.
man.
Yeah, it's been good.
All right.
Good topic. What's up? How's your
Yeah, I feel like we would be remiss if we did
competition?
not spend some time talking about fitness before we say goodbye, right?
Yeah, I saw we had 5 minutes to the hour. I was like, oh, we should go to the jacked part of the theology. Um, so the prep, the
Yeah, it
competition
still
prep. How's
it
that
still
going?
it still goes. I learned that shows happen essentially in the fall, like in September, October, and then like in March or April um in the spring. And so my guess is at this point is that the coach is like, it's going to take the winter to get him ready. So I haven't heard it officially, but I think we're probably on the long
On the
schedule.
March, April.
I could,
Yeah.
I think I'm at probably within 5 pounds of where I was whenever we last talked at the beginning of summer. So I haven't like lost weight, but I see a lot of change in the body. So I think he is trying to, build muscle and lose weight, but do so without losing muscle. So I mean, a little at a time, but it feels excruciatingly slow, even though each week he almost
He's
on a
excited.
weekly basis. Well, he's excited. Yeah, he's very happy, very pleased, and he's intense. So I know that he's not blowing smoke. But I also receive less and less food every time we have a conversation. So I kind of stopped reaching out to ask how I'm doing because every time I reached out to ask how I was doing, he'd be like, "Yeah, we're gonna cut that. We're gonna cut that in half. That that you're eating there in that meal."
A thing you
Um,
enjoy, no more.
yeah, no more. Yeah, it was all good in the beginning, but now we're not. I will be glad whenever we get to the phase where like the carbs go way up in order to really pack on muscle. But right now, it's trying to cut the body fat down as strategically as possible. So that's never fun to be in that.
Yeah, cutting's
What
never fun. Bulking season's fun.
bulking season is everything about bulking season is fun except for the mirror. If you can avoid the mirror, bulking season is great. How are you? How was your summer?
Good. Yeah, we like I said at the beginning, we spent August traveling and relaxing, spending time with family. So that was good. Try to still fitness when I could. Obviously, wasn't as uh, focused, and so I'm back to the regular grind this week, which I just ended the week. So um, this morning, so I'm feeling it all over the body. But it's good. Good feeling.
Yeah, try to lose a little
Uh,
bit just so you can put it back on at the holidays,
yeah,
right?
yeah, and then yeah, I just feel healthy and jacked. Of course, try to get those numbers up and set some PRs again. Um, so it kind of timed out well. We're kind of in a deload phase in our cycle at the gym, so I got back to it the right time, and I think in 2 week or another week, we'll hit a strength cycle again, and so that'll be fun to see where I'm at. Yeah, just trying to stay jacked. Um, well, I was thinking of I need since you're doing a competition, I need to find a competition. Um, maybe since you said the spring, that's better. I was gonna jump in the fall with you, but in the spring I'll find a CrossFit competition and
CrossFit,
put
come on,
myself
bodybuilding,
myself out there.
come on, do a physique show.
Ah, I could do that. There's one at our local um, muscle gym. They do a physique show every January or March. They started like a diet plan in January, and then so like in March they do a physique show in the gym. So
Do it.
I could potentially do
Jump
that.
in. You can do that in a CrossFit competition at the same time.
Yeah, no, I could.
Z the fittest will he will love you. You can kick his
Uh,
butt.
I had one kind of moment. I do this all the time, but like today it happened again where I can see like a guy my age or so who sizes me up and
I love these.
thinks that they can beat me. And they always come out too hot. They always come out too hot. And this guy today, he it was a bike cash in, and it was deadlifts, press overhead, and then bike at the end. And he beat me off the bike by like a minute, and I was like, "What an idiot!" And so
They always underestimate you, Matt. I don't know
I
why, but
know. And
you're
then
always getting underestimated, and I always love the stories of you just like
my
leaving them in the dust.
my fitness gift is I can figure out where I'm at physically and what I can do and pace myself to maximize the workout. So when I do a workout properly, I always finish stronger than I start. That's what I'm good at. So I'm like, oh boy. And so I did. I whooped his butt. I came back, beat him, and then I knew he was sizing me up. So he came over after and complimented me,
That's
and
impressive
he
that he
ate crow.
complimented you. I mean,
He ate crow. Yeah. No,
that's
I mean that's the thing about CrossFit is like everybody's very for the most part, everybody's very friendly and
it's very collegial.
encouraging.
Yeah, it
Yeah,
is,
very
which is nice.
so
Yeah, so
anyhow.
I finished my personal training certification.
Oh yeah.
it only took like a
Yeah.
year and 3 months to get through it.
Wow. Congrats.
Holy crap, that was the hardest thing I have ever done. I totally underestimated. I mean, there are lots. I say lots. There are a number of personal training certifications. There are two that are considered reputable enough to be the premier. I did one of them. I totally underestimated what I would have to know or do in order to get this thing. Oh my gosh, it was like getting a bachelor's degree in physical science with musculature, movement. It was the human body. It was insane. And I'm doing this the whole time thinking, and I don't want to, I don't want to come off sounding too much like an ass, but I will a little bit. But I'm looking, thinking, gym bros are personal trainers all the time and pass this. How in the world do these gym bros do this? And I am having so much, like, I'm certain I'm going to fail this. This is just, it makes no sense to me how these
Well, they get their
meatheads
bachelor's degree in it.
can do that. Yeah, they get their bachelor's degree. But I realized at the very end of it, because when I started the process, the gym that I went to at the very beginning of the process when we moved here said, "Oh, we could have gotten that. How much did you buy? Did you buy the certification journey yet? The package?" And I'm like, yeah, I paid for it, so I'm going to start and take the test. They're like, "Oh, how much did you pay for it?" And I told them how much I paid for it. It was an exorbitant amount of money. "Oh, we could have gotten that for you for $200." And at that point, I was like, "Well, crap. Well, I've already paid for it. Whatever." Well, then I come to find out a few weeks ago, I'm researching and studying. Well, yeah, there are two ways to get the certification. One of them is you take the test and read the book, and it's proctored and it's closed book. You've got to know it all. Only 70% or so of the people who take it pass. So almost a ton of people don't. Or there's another way, which is open book, that you can pay a few $100s to do. And but what you get is either the way I did it, you're actually a certified personal trainer, or if you do it the other way, it's you have a certificate of personal training, which is different.
Yeah.
And so I was like, so a lot of these folks are doing it that way. Not all of them. I don't want to be like ableist where, just because
Yeah.
you're a meathead and a young
But the average
bro.
person coming to the gym, they probably don't know the difference. So
No, yeah. But
yeah.
it was the hardest thing I've ever done. I took tons of practice tests. I had a good enough handle on what I knew I needed to know. And I get into the test, and none of the things that I have studied were on the test, which I kind of anticipated because people said the practice tests don't really help. You just need to know everything. But I get into it, and like literally 75% of what I had of the questions were not from the text. But what they were was you had to know what was in the text. Like you had to, so they'd ask you questions that made you utilize two or three things that you did know in order to get the answer. And so
Yeah. Wow.
I was certain I had failed because I'm not a standardized test taker of any of any strength. I'm horrible at multiple choice tests. Don't know how I passed, but I did on the first try. I cried. I'm literally in this like bay of computers, in this office complex, taking, and I'm like bawling in tears, crying because I could not believe that it said passed. I would have taken a picture of the screen that says passed just to remind myself that it actually did say passed, but everything that I owned was locked in a bag behind me. like you go into the room and they lock all of your stuff into a bag. So that you don't have anything on. You can't wear wristwatch, can't take phones in, no scratch paper, no pencils. Like you're doing all the math in your head. They made me turn my pockets inside out to make sure I wasn't taking anything in. They made me roll up my pant legs to make sure there was nothing like in my socks or there. I had, because I'm old, I had readers on, I had glasses. They made me give them the glasses so that they could look on the inside of the arms of the glasses to make sure nothing was written on there. Like It was insanity.
Which is amazing because they have all those policies because someone did it.
Somebody tried. Yeah, but it's over. I will never let it lapse again because I'm never taking that test again. But I'm thankful to say through that very long explanation that I'm now officially certified personal trainer.
So are you doing personal training at the gym now?
I don't know. I've thought about it. The problem with doing that is the gym that I'm at, I might not have to, but most gyms, are going to make you sign a non-compete where you can't do anything on your own outside of the gym. And I really want to work
Yeah,
with
do it
local
online.
pastors.
Yeah.
I want to, yeah, the house that we're looking at getting. Um, we've talked so long your battery is exhausted, Matt.
Battery exhausted.
Not only is the battery exhausted, but so am I.
That's funny. Well,
I guess this
bye.
is our cue.